G'day, guys. Welcome to another Dark Cave Miners. Rob, welcome. It's been a pleasure hosting you once again. What are we talking about this week?
This week we're going to dive a little bit into profitability, overclocking, and talk a little bit more about the GPUs specifically. I think we've covered in the past, how to mine, right? At the very basic level, how to connect to a pool, how to find a mining software. So now we'll get it a little bit more into the details. We won't get too deep into overclocking because it's a deep world, right? I think you can really get lost into several aspects of it, but we'll give some pointers and a few starting points, and I think it may go a long way for a lot of new miners.
Yeah, that's definitely one dark cave that you go down. Once you're sort
Yeah.
of going down that rabbit hole, it can take you
Uh,
anywhere.
oh yeah, tell me about memory tweaks and bootstrapping different BIOS. It's just you can really get lost, and maybe you improve your hash rate, but you could also destroy your GPU. So be careful when you use some of the tools that are out there.
Exactly. And that's a cool, I find it sort of fascinating. And when something goes wrong, I kind of find it funny just because you're kind of tweaking and fiddling and expecting that everything's going to be fine and dandy, and the next thing you know, your house is burnt down, and yeah, you've
Yeah.
lost everything.
Exactly, right? So I mean, definitely there's an area to be careful with. The good thing about GPU mining is look, I mean, if you set everything up right, you're using the right cables, the proper power, utilization. I think that you'll be okay from a fire standpoint. You could push your cards, right? People push their cards to the max. They can overheat, they get really hot, but there is a limit on the cards where they'll shut down. And you can also put settings within, your mining software, especially some of the operating systems that are out there like Hive, where if it hits a certain temperature, it automatically shuts down your rig. So there's fail safes around temperature, but definitely as you build your mining rig, be sure you're looking at power utilization. It's a really important factor to mining.
Yeah, most definitely. So what are we going to kick off first?
So I think, let's start with GPUs in general. So I think,
Yeah,
there's always the question that's asked, that's, what's the most profitable GPU, right? And I
yeah,
think that it's a very hard question to ask, right? I think it's really boils down to, what is your budget, right? As you're looking to getting into mining or you're looking to purchase equipment, people have a budget in mind. So, I mean, I think that there's a portion that you need to set aside just for building the rig itself, the motherboard, the memory, the PSU, everything that we kind of talked about in one of our previous episodes. That's just the core basics. But then when you get to the GPU side of it, there's really different tiers of GPUs, right? And
yeah,
there's, I would call just like low, medium, high, right? And just kind of set it like that where they both come at different price ranges, especially, these days. I think that it's a wild market. But they also deliver different hash rate. They're, also a lot of, you may be looking for versatility, right? You may not want to just mine Ergo or Ethereum or, a specific coin. You may want to jump around, try different coins. So, I mean, there's definitely, um, algorithm specific GPUs. So when you're out there purchasing and looking at what algo you're looking to mine, take that into consideration as well. But again, it really boils down to cost and what you're willing to spend, right?
yeah.
Um, so I think that there's entry level, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about that and what are some of the entry level GPUs that are out there. And then we can talk, a little bit more about, some of the higher end and then even some of the professional series that are now available.
Yeah, most definitely. Um, and like you mentioned, the options are numerous, the configurations are numerous. Like it all depends, and that's what I always say as well. If someone asks me about mining it and profitability, and it just depends. So there's so many variables, such as your power, the rate of power that you're paying, the hash rate, the efficiency, the algorithm, like just the ambient temperature can have an impact. Like there's numerous sort of metrics that sort of at play here. So probably just kicking things off on like the consumer entry level side of things. So what car would you recommend in that respect?
I mean, a very entry level, to be honest with you. On the Nvidia side, I would look at two cards. I think the 3060 and the 3060, even the 3060 Ti is a really good entry level card. You can get them for fairly low prices now compared to what we were paying, several months ago.
Yeah, no,
Like literally almost 50% or more.
yeah,
So I mean, it's really ridiculous. But shop around. There's definitely different manufacturers, different OEMs. Um, each do provide, when you look at a card and you look at an OEM, right? And an OEM may be like MSI or Asus or, Sapphire. I mean, there's several of them out there.
yeah,
Dig into the card a little bit more. They use different memory. Different memory it provides different performance. There's all sorts of different variations of a 3060, let's say, right? Like
yeah,
for example, I have a single fan 3060 and it's the most bizarre card I've ever worked with. It's like sometimes I have great hash rate. I think, last I checked it was at 126 mega hash, which,
nice.
is great, but I've also seen it down at like 110 and it's the LHR kicking in and,
Yeah,
the single fan and the thermal control and all that. So I mean, again, there's so many different variables that you need to consider. On the AMD side, I mean, it depends on, what you're looking for. I think entry level, if you're interested in buying used cards, go out and buy a 580, 8 gig, make it last a little bit longer, right? Just because there are 4 gigs available. But as the memory table or the DAG increases, then
yeah,
it's going to be a little bit harder to mine with those 4 gigabyte cards. So go after an 8 gig. They're really cheap right now. I think I've seen them for $100 to $200.
they're dime a dozen, aren't they?
Yeah, there's a lot of them. And interestingly enough, if you look at some of the stats on Hive OS, it's one of the top used cards for mining from an AMD standpoint. So that's what I would recommend if you're looking for a new AMD card. Um, again, entry level, lower end, the 6600 XTs or
Yeah,
6600s themselves. They're really nice cards. They perform, fairly well from a hash rate standpoint, but it's on the lower hash rate end, but also delivers lower wattage, lower
yeah,
power utilization. So
yeah. I think that sort of plays a part as well. Is just the efficiency. I think that's a big factor. So you might have purchase a card, say $500, and the hash rate return versus the cost base, and then considering the power usage as well. I think that's a sort of holy trio of sort of what you need to get right in regards to efficiency. But the cards that you just mentioned, 3060s, 3060 Ti's, the 580s, they're just workhorses on basically any algorithm you kind of put them on. I think that's the efficiency that they sort of put out for basically any algorithm. I think they're pretty great, bang for buck little models there.
yeah, and I mean, look, I think, shop around, there's obviously higher models out there. You could look at 3070s, 3080s, TIs, and, as obviously get to the big daddy of NVIDIA, the 3090, right? And even the 3090 Ti. I think it's again, what are you willing to spend? I think some of the 3070s and the 3080 Ti's have come down a lot in price.
Yeah,
So, when you compare from a hash rate to price standpoint, you may get more bang for your buck buying, those kind of mid-range cards, so to speak. But again, I think it's really weighing all the contributing factors, like you mentioned, right? Um, what is your true cost of power, right? You can, look it up, but there's also other factors like, peak times, things like that, where
yeah,
your power rates could double, right? Or if you hit a certain power utilization, as a home, your power rates could increase. So look at your contracts, your power contracts that you have with your power companies and just see there, sometimes there's some fine print there. And you would want to understand that as you look to increase your power utilization.
yeah, most
Um,
definitely. Then that can
you know,
tie into a bit of a strategy that you put together and mining at certain times of day and just little factors like that. It can all sort of tie into your overall efficiency. Just got a
yeah,
comment here from Terry. G'day, guys. Hey, Terry, how are you, mate? Thanks for
hey,
tuning in.
yeah, thanks for joining. So yeah, and I think the other factor that needs to be weighed is obviously price, right? I think miners will jump around and they'll look for the most profitable. And there's different ways to look at it, right? I think a lot of people default, and we'll go through how to do this, but a lot of people default to what to mine, right? And it's a
Yeah,
great tool, don't get me wrong. I use it, almost every day. Just to understand where the market's at, but what to mine is kind of just a baseline, right? So I mean, when you are using it, take into consideration, though there are factors in there that you do need to adjust to understand what your true profitability is, right? So I think when miners are out there looking at cards, looking to purchase cards, you know, take into consideration, not what today's price is, maybe do a little bit of a longer snapshot, right? Do it over the past 3 months, right? Look at the highs and lows of the coin that you're looking to mine. I think that there's some potential upside that a miner may want to look at as well versus, I'm just going to mine the best coin right now. I may hold it, I may liquidate it immediately. So I mean, I think that there's just, other things to consider as you're, making your purchase other than, just price of the GPU itself.
yeah, most definitely. So that's basically a little bit of an introduction on the cards themselves. So how do we sort of optimize these things? Obviously, like you mentioned on the intro, there's numerous sort of ways we can go about this. So uh, basically, sky's the limit. Each card has their little sweet spot. It's just a matter of sort of fine tuning them and then just getting them, not push them to the absolute maximum. I sort of like just to have them sit back a little bit and then just run smoothly, just for the cost of an extra couple of hash rate sort of thing.
Yeah, so great question. And I think, now let's share our screen and kind of show what I would personally do and what I've done from, kind of the beginning of mining is start at the community, right? Start at the community, go to the community, ask around. I think, one thing that I've seen with the Ergo community is there's a great, we call it our Bible, right? Our mining Bible, but there's a great spreadsheet that was created that several miners submitted, basically what their overclock settings were, what their hash rate, results were, what mining pool they were connected to, what miner they were using. So I think there's a lot of data there. I mean, this is going back years, right?
Yeah,
So I think that's a good starting point here, and then we can roll into how that ties into profitability.
yeah, sure. Let's jump in.
All right, so let me just share my screen. All right, are we all good?
Yep,
All right, so this is the spreadsheet, and it's a Google Doc. It can actually be found in every single Ergo-based mining community chat, in Telegram and also Discord. It's generally in the pinned messages. We can also add a link to this video as well.
yep.
But as you can see here, there's again, basically every single GPU, and it's broken down by, what the efficiency of the overall GPU is, if it's AMD or Nvidia, what the actual card is, the OEM or the manufacturer, the model, the memory, all the information about the card itself. And then it gets into overclock settings, right? And when you say overclock settings, a lot of people are like, oh no, I don't want to mess with my card, it's gonna break it. And that's not necessarily true. There are tools, even provided by the manufacturers themselves. So, Nvidia and AMD,
Yep.
where you can adjust your overclocks on your cards. It's just, be safe, be smart, go out and find a starting point, right? I think that's what we've all done. You can go out there blind and start messing with the numbers, but
That's a long journey.
yeah, why? I mean, don't reinvent the wheel. Someone's already
Yeah,
done all the hard work. I think that there is the silicon lottery factor, right?
yeah.
So, not every card is made equal.
That's
Um,
the funny thing as well. Like, say you could have just a 6 GPU mining rig of all 3060 Ti's, for instance. They could all be variable, and it's just kind of, it blows your mind just how much fine tuning you kind of have to do to each card.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, you could, like you said, you have the settings, the set the same for every single card, but they're off by a mega hash or two. And it's like, it doesn't make sense,
Yeah.
or even, worst cases where it's off, 10, 20, and you just can't get one, one card stubborn, or, on the flip side, you have a card that's, doing better hash rate than anyone that so I mean,
Yeah.
it's really a gamble, but, when you look at cards, there's two different ways, and we'll just start with simple overclocking. There's a lot that you can do to, memory timings, voltage parameters, power limits. We won't get into that today. We'll talk about it a little bit, but I think that let's just focus on some of the two core factors.
Yep.
And no pun intended, your core clock and your memory clock, right? And what are those? So, I mean, I think when you look at a GPU, it's in itself, it's almost like a small computer. Let's just
Yep.
call it that, right? So when you look at the core clock, just think of the core as your processor of the GPU. And then you look at your memory clock, it's the memory or the RAM of the GPU, right? Or
Yep.
also known as VRAM. So that's one way to look at it. When you say clock, it's really the timing or the speed that those two functions process, right?
Yep.
So when you look at, overclocking in general, those are the two main, things that you want to adjust. And when you're looking at Ergo specifically, Ergo is very memory hard, as they call it, right? So when you look at it versus some other algorithms, and Ethereum included, although, there are some cards where you can literally just switch over from Ethereum and they work perfectly and you get the best hash rate possible. But there are some cards that you need to adjust. Um, Ergo does a lot better when you are using most of the memory from your GPU,
Yep.
and just a portion of your core. There are some cards that do require more core just because of the way that they process. But at times you can almost, with the 3060, for example, or even a lot of the 30 series, you're really underclocking to some extent, right? To get the
Yep.
best performance on Ergo,
Yeah.
which means
Basically,
you're
yeah, I was just going to say, just elaborate on it, but just, yeah, basically turning your core down and then your memory up.
exactly. And that allows the unit itself, when you're turning your core down to allow for the memory, boost to increase. So it's the way that it works kind of in tandem. But without going down a rabbit hole there, I think that because we can very easily,
Yeah.
I think, taking a step back to overclocking as a whole, again, start somewhere. I think for Ergo specifically, this is what I've always recommended, to everyone that I know. It's a great tool. Start here, but don't stop here. I think that, there
Yeah.
is again, the tweaking factor, and I think that to get the best performance out of your card, you will need to make some adjustments, right? Because what works for me may not work for you, right? And my settings, or the way I mine, right, or my style, my mining style, whatever you want to call it, may not be the same. I may be looking for efficiency. You may be looking for the most mega hash possible,
Yeah.
right? Which may reduce some of your efficiency from a power standpoint. So there's a lot of things to consider, right? Um,
Yeah.
and
It's a
the
fine
other,
line.
it's a very fine line. So again, start here. I think that this is a good tool to use. The way that I recommend, and I'll show you a couple tools on how to overclock, specifically, but a couple ways that I do it. Pick your starting point. You could look here. There's several videos out there on, what's the best overclock settings for specific GPUs.
Yeah.
They're all different. So, I mean, again, just go out there, do your research. And I think doing that will be very helpful as you try to understand what the profitability of the card is, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so the way that I like to do it is you go and you start at these points. So you'd set your core clock at, plus 100, right? And as you're adjusting, adjust it in increments, right? So you may go up to 200, you may go up to 300, right? And you keep pushing it really until the point of failure. And I hate to say that, but you kind of want your rig to crash as you're overclocking.
Yeah.
So it's gonna crash. Don't be scared. It's just either because it doesn't like that you're adjusting the card or it's rejecting the overclock.
Yeah.
Um, Once you hit that point, restart it, let it run back at the overclock that you left it at, and see if it crashes again. If it continuously crashes, right? So I'm saying let it crash more than once. If it continuously crashes, then start backing it down. And
Yeah.
you can back it down in smaller increments. So say you're doing 100 leaps, you do 50 retractions, right? So you reduce in 50 increments. And then if you crash again, you could even make it a smaller increment. And that's where you really get into your fine tuning. Some,
And
as
this
you
is the
see,
fun part as well, isn't it?
yeah, it really, I mean, some people get crazy with it. They'll go by 1 point because they're getting
Yeah.
an extra decimal of hash rate. And it's like, look, settle at some point, right? If you're close to what everyone else is getting, don't drive yourself crazy unless you like to tinker, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And it should be
so
noted also just to give the rig time to level out and then just sort of just balance itself
absolutely.
as well. I think that's also important. Don't just have it running for say a minute. Give it a good sort of 10 minutes or so just to sort of find that happy medium and see if it, which way it does react.
Yeah, no, exactly right. I think, give it a minute, even, give it a day, right? If you
Yeah.
start seeing that, before you made your overclock adjustment, you're crashing 3 times a day and it's
Yeah.
rebooting and comes back up and everything's fine for hours.
Yeah.
Well, there's probably something that's a little bit too aggressive and you may want to tone it down just a bit. It could even be, 5 points, right? Just, make minor incremental adjustments
Yeah.
and you should be in a good spot.
Most definitely.
So let's talk about tools and how to overclock, specifically, right? Because I think there's a lot of tools out there. Again, Nvidia has their own tool. I don't think it's the greatest to be honest with you, but more for other types of developers, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there is with AMD, there's Radeon, which is actually a fairly decent tool for overclocking. Um, However, if you're using, like, say you have a mixed rig and you're trying to, mine with AMD and Nvidia cards, and you're, trying to overclock on Radeon, which is, one of their softwares, and say you're using MSI Afterburner, which is another third-party tool, which we'll get into. Um, I think that there's sometimes some conflicting, data that, trying to run both tools at the same time. You may have crashing just from that, just because they're fighting with each other. So be careful with that. It's just, from experience, I've had that problem myself. So select your tools wisely.
Yeah. And that's the thing. There's a big toolbox as well. Um, yeah, it's fun. I love all this tinkering part. I've said it a couple of times in this stream so far, and that's what I really love about mining itself. There's multiple different ways to go about it. There's different tools. It's just finding what works for you.
Yeah, exactly right. And so MSI Afterburner, I think it's a lot of people's go-to tool.
Yeah,
I'm not currently mining on my laptop. I was gonna do kind of a live stream and show, the adjustment and the, cause and effect type thing, but if my laptop crashes, then the stream ends, so that wouldn't be a good thing. So
exactly.
I
And
think we
sure as
should,
shit that'll happen.
yeah, exactly right. So we'll just kind of, talk about it high level, but this is basically the tool that you get. There's so many different skins, so you can customize it to your liking, different colors, all sorts of fun stuff.
Yeah.
But generally what would happen, and let me back up, I'm sorry, this is a Windows tool.
Yes.
So if you're mining on Windows, this is probably a tool that you would be using. Again, you would adjust your core clock, your memory clock. When you are mining, my GPU is probably running because we're using, streaming right now. So you can see it's running very low, but it will actually show you the current speed. The GPU would be the core speed, memory would be your memory speed, the actual voltage of the card, and then the temperature, which is very important, right? And You know, again, you can get into, tools and, all sorts of different metrics. This is really just showing you your core temperature. Other tools show you your memory temperature and, all different other parts of the, the memory that, you may want to see, where you can get really granular, or you can just look at it more from a macro level.
Yeah.
So again, lots of tools out there, lots of different choices. But this is kind of, straight down the middle. It gives you a lot of flexibility. There are some, advanced settings that you can go in and adjust as well. But again, your core and your memory. So let's say, you typically start this as 0. And that's generally where you would start, right? And when it's set at 0, and you may see some fluctuation here because I am running the GPU, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your clocks are running at 0, right? That's just basically the standard setting of the GPU. And every GPU is a little bit different, right? And they all have their kind of core, their basic settings.
Yep.
Anything that you set above 0 would be overclocking that that GPU. Anything that you set below or in a negative number would be underclocking. And the same applies for memory as well. So you would again go up, go down, and that would be your over and underclocking as well.
Yep. And it's just you hit apply, and then you just give it a little bit of time to balance itself out, and away you go.
Yeah, exactly right. So, and then there's, other adjustments. Some people like to adjust their fans, right? So their fan speed could also be adjusted through here. You can set a temperature limit, so we talked about that as well. So you can set it to where if it hits 70 degrees, you may want to shut it down, or it will actually tone down, your actual clock or your
Yeah.
overclock.
Throttle itself.
Yep, exactly right. And then, I don't want to, talk about over and under volting, right, just yet, but there are some GPUs where this is very, very important, especially when you get into some of the LHR models.
Yeah.
There are some miners that have kind of, overcome some of that, with some of the releases that came out from Nvidia, but or the leaks, I should say.
That's another subject.
Yeah, that's another subject. But you can increase your voltage, undervolt. So, there are some settings that you can apply there. Obviously, people do look to try to utilize the least power available, right? So
Yep.
something to look into, something to explore. But again, every card is different. Every card has its limitations. So as you look to play into, over and under volting, proceed with caution, just because you could potentially damage your card if you were setting the voltage too high or too low, and it's calling for power that's not potentially there. So
Yeah.
so again, proceed with caution there. So yeah, so that's one tool that's available. And then there's other tools as well. So as you look into mining operating systems like Hive OS,
Yeah.
that's kind of like the all-in-one package, right? So they have their own set of overclocking tools as well, and we'll show that. So this is one of my rigs here. This is actually my AMD rig, and then I do have a 3090 on there. So you can see here, actually, this display that you see now, it's just the overall kind of dashboard, so to speak. It displays, what GPU I'm using, what mega hash it's currently mining at, the temperatures for both the core and the memory, which is really nice. As you saw in MSI, you were only able to kind of see the core.
Yep.
Fan speeds, which, you can kind of see. I, jack up my fan speeds. I'm not gonna lie. I think running them at 100, fans are cheap, GPUs are not. So
Exactly.
something
You,
goes wrong, you can always replace them.
yeah, I'd rather lose a $5 or $10 fan than a $500 GPU.
Exactly.
It's just a
Exactly
consumer
right.
grade, well, a component basically, isn't it?
100%. and there's a lot of them out there. You can buy them on eBay, 12 packs, and it'd still be a tenth of the cost of the GPU itself.
And we all know that RGB adds hash rate to your mining rig, so
Yeah,
always
exactly. Go
RGB.
go go all in. Lights, strobe lights, you name it. So anyways, and it also, kind of shows you basically an overall snapshot of all the overclock settings that you currently have set. So you can see here, it shows my core, DPM. These are some, so I do play with, undervolting, my cards. So I do play with some of the memory voltage and things of that nature.
Yep.
And then the memory timings as well,
Yep.
right? You set power limits. Some cards you do, some cards you don't. I've always found with AMD, it's always best, to adjust your power with your settings and your undervolting and just leave the power limit alone.
Yep.
Whereas Nvidia cards, they can be power hungry at times, especially this 3090. I mean, if you let it go, I mean, what's the max power? 450 watts. So I mean, it could really chew up a lot of power that's not necessarily needed, especially with Ergo and mining Ergo itself.
Yep.
So set a limit there. There's, obviously, some settings and some guides out there that show you how to do that safely. So once you're in Hive and it's like, all right, so how do I set all this, right? So you can go to each card specifically. There's like a little speedometer or like a little gauge here that
Yep.
you can click on, or you can do it from a macro level. So if you have, for example, all 3060s, as a mining rig and you want to use all the same settings, you can click this all button here and set them all at the same time. So I'll just pick one of my cards, and this is kind of give you an overview of what it looks like. Again, we talked about starting points, right? So one of the good things about Hive is they do give you popular presets. So these would be, default settings that other miners within, the Hive kind of ecosystem are using as far as their settings. Again, it shows you all the different algorithms you can sort it, by ERG.
Yep.
Depending on the card, it may or may not be available. And FE is kind of a rare card. It's a founder's edition. I wouldn't say it's rare, but it's not a card that a lot of people use.
Yep.
It is part of the Vega series, but anyways,
Well, just on
depending on,
Vegas, mate, we've just got a comment here from Robert
yeah,
Piper, and it's straight up your alley. So he's been buying used Vegas 54 and 64s on eBay. A great efficiency, low price. He's got a couple for $165 USD.
yeah, that I hate to say it, it makes me cry.
It's right
There's
up
a
your
lot.
alley, isn't it?
I love Vegas. They're beautiful cards. There was some impact to the hash rate, which I think a lot of ergo miners are crying about, but we won't go down that road. We'll just reference it. But I think you look back, I don't know, probably maybe 4 or 5 months at this point. Vegas were like $800 or $900,
Yeah.
and you better buy them before they're gone because everybody was buying up Vegas. And when you look at the market now, like you just said, I mean they're 150 to $200.
Yeah.
So it's a a really interesting shift in market conditions, let's say. But they're great cards. They hash, great. I don't have these tuned the best. FEs, do have their own challenges.
Yep.
Um, but they're great cards. So, I mean, if you're looking at AMD and you're an AMD fan, I do recommend them. All right, and then let's take a look at Nvidia. So Nvidia is a little bit different from a setting standpoint. So they do give you a little bit less options. I think you can tinker a little bit more with AMD. So you can set your core, your memory clock, your fan speed, your power limit. But you can't really adjust all of your you know your voltages specifically to your memory or your core.
Yep.
Right, so Nvidia typically uses the power limit specifically. There may be ways to do it with other tools outside of just the standard settings in Hive.
Yep.
And then there are other things here that you can set. So the the good old ETH pill, right? The ETH enlargement pill. So I think they renamed it, I guess, for political correctness. So they'll
Yeah.
call it the Nvidia's GDDR
Yeah.
R5X pill. That's a memory timing adjustment. So if you are using a card that has that memory, I do suggest using it. I think it's a really good impact to your hash rate, and it does work on Ergo as well.
Yeah.
So
A
that's
bit
just a click of the
disappointed with that
button.
name change.
Yeah, yeah. I think they even had it. I mean, they'll say it in here. Yeah, there it is. Oh God, an ETH enlargement pill utility. So I guess they still kept true to the original
Yeah.
name.
Yeah. Good on them.
Works well. Yeah, works well on 1080s. I actually had a 1080, so I've had some experience with it. But
Yeah.
it does. I've seen it. It's increased my hash. I think it's like 25%.
Yeah.
So definitely something to check out. There are some sub settings. So as you set that, you go to the pill command line parameters, and they give you some further information, or you could look up the memory timing adjustment itself, on the internet, and it will give you a full detail of all the different settings.
Yep.
And then back to, kind of AMD, again, similar thing. But it does, obviously give you a few more options to adjust your memory voltage, your memory controller voltage. There's all these, obviously fancy acronyms for it, but we won't go down that road. It's very confusing for people. But there are, adjustments that can be made here. Again, there are some really good overclocking guides out there that, there's a lot of smart people. They know, how to adjust these cards. They look a little bit deeper into memory timings and things of that
Yeah.
nature. So there are further adjustments that can be done. Obviously you just have to dig into that a little bit more. And then you can utilize some of, the advanced configuration, some of the memory tweaks, some of the adjustments that are out there. Now, some of these don't work as well as they used to. This used to be, kind of, for the Vega users, it was an awesome tool. You can kind of, use the standard AMD memory tweak and make some adjustments there. Some cards, it may still work a little bit depending on the settings. And then there's, other tools that you can use for kind of the extreme overclockers where they really know how to go in there and adjust the memory timings, through a BIOS editor or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's overclocking kind of, I guess from a simple approach, right? I think,
Yeah.
again, there's a lot more that you can really go down a rabbit hole, kind of exploring. But I think, a starting point, again, focus on the core and the memory clock, and maybe start looking at some of your power limits for Nvidia cards. And I think you'll see that, overclocking is really not as scary as many people make it
No.
out to seem.
No, the tools make it really easy, and just like to say that just take your time with it. There's no rush. The tools that are there, so you've got both the MSI Afterburner. If you're on the Linux side of things, you can jump into Hive OS. But then also looking at the community resources like we brought up earlier, having the spreadsheets and things. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, have a starting point, and then just make some little tweaks here and there, and then just find that balance that you're happy with.
Yeah, exactly. And I just thought of another thing that's a really good point is the actual driver that you're
Yeah,
using.
true.
So, there's drivers for each card, and Hive's really good at kind of using the latest driver. They know kind of what works best for mining. So they're always going to push that to you typically. You can upgrade, downgrade if you have certain cards that don't do as well, but as you're out there doing your research, look at what driver works best. Especially around some of the Nvidia cards, it gets a little bit wonky as you're looking at, some specific cards with LHR. So, another important factor as you kind of, put the whole grand scheme of things together and you're really trying to, improve the efficiency of your card.
Yeah, the drivers is a big one, like you mentioned, especially with the LHR when that was a factor, because you could have just a couple of versions apart and the card will act completely different.
Oh yeah, I mean, and I think that it still does to a point. I
Yeah,
think the mining software has done a great job at really not needing to make all these adjustments, but you do need to play with your power limits a little bit.
yeah,
Just because I've even still seen some wonky things. If your power limit's set too high, you get lower hash rate, which makes no sense. You know what I mean? You would think that, that you would, be getting higher hash rate with more power, but it's just, there's still some uniqueness to certain cards, but there's definitely been much progress, I think, since LHR first started, and all the frustrations with
Yeah,
trying to overclock to the right settings.
yeah, most definitely. I think that's a pretty good overview. What's next?
Yeah, so I mean, the reason why we went through this is, I think this is all very important as you kind of factor in profitability, right? I
Yeah,
think, as miners will eventually, and specifically GPU miners, right, will eventually, as the Ethereum merge is coming, right? I mean, the date is set, the difficulty bomb is basically loaded, so it's just a matter of time before it happens.
yeah, roughly
Um,
4 weeks or so from now.
yeah, exactly. So I mean, as miners look to migrate to other coins, I think that, for one, overclocking is going to be important because miners are going to come off of Ethereum, and if they don't have experience with Ergo, and some do, right? They may just, leave the same overclock settings, and that may not be necessary at some points. We did say that Ergo is very memory intensive. So, at times you could leave your memory usually, where it is. You may even be able to increase it a little bit compared to Ethereum. However, you generally can reduce your clock, your core clock, and at times lower your power utilization. Depending, again, how deep you go into undervolting and things like that. But there are ways to reduce it down where um, you know, you're not necessarily needing to use such aggressive overclocks to mine Ergo. And what does that bring? I think it brings, obviously not only better thermal impact to your cards, right? Because I've seen a significant difference between Ethereum, just with temperatures, roughly
Yeah,
25% depending on the card, which, obviously improves life expectancy of the card. Um, but at the same time, I've always felt that my rigs run better, when I'm mining Ergo. You know what I mean? It's just it seems to be a little bit more steady. I think with Ethereum, a lot of people are very aggressive with their overclocks, especially some of the hardcore miners.
yeah,
And you have crashes, and there's some, difficulty really trying to get it, fine tuned. Where Ergo's, at least in my opinion, is a little bit more, you know, I guess user friendly, so to speak.
yeah. It brings in a little bit more efficiency, like you mentioned. So you could be utilizing, I don't know, just a round figure of 100 watts extra compared to what you actually need. And that ties into efficiency gained in not having to provide as much cooling, but then also on the flip side of that, you're not actually having so much power draw as well. So you're kind of winning on both sides there. You're not producing as much heat, which you have to then disperse, but also you're not actually pulling as much power from the wall also.
Yeah, I agreed 100%. And, I think that, it again, as you're looking at kind of what GPUs do I want to buy, what is makes the most, sense from a profitability standpoint, weigh in a lot of these other outside factors, such as overclocking, right? We're going to show you a tool in a bit, which is whattomine.com. It's again, it's a tool a lot of people use, but the defaults there are not necessarily the most efficient overclock that you can get on the card. So as you're looking at profitability, it's good to understand where can I be from an overclocking standpoint, again, to get the maximum efficiency out of the card in order to generate the most revenue or the most profitability from a mining
Yeah,
standpoint. So maybe that's a good segue into what to mine itself. So
yeah, for sure.
there's a couple ways to look at this. So you can go directly to the site. Obviously, the site, it shows you pretty much all the cards. There's, a lot of cards here, some of the newer models that are out there. From the, professional standpoint, there's some pro cards that came out that are now available, but it also shows you all the algorithms. Some people may come to the site and it could even be, confusing, right? It's like, what is all this? What's kapow, progpat,
Yeah.
it goes on, and someone may be just looking for Ergo, right? And not find it. So I mean, I think, you could come to the main site. We did do something as a community. We do have our good old Ergonaut handbook.
Yep.
A lot of, I'd say most of the standard cards are on here. We set this in a way where you can click hash rate and profitability, and it kind of self sorts itself just based on, Ergo itself. So
Yep.
let's pick a 3060, and you see it kind of wipes everything out. Um, and it's just showing us kind of the Ergo profitability, right? So before we look at that, there's a few things here that are, I guess, variables that you can adjust. So obviously you pick your card, right? So we're looking at the 3060. It's defaulted, so I didn't have to pick it, but you can go in here, you could select your card, you could enter the number of cards that you have.
Yep.
You may have a mixed rig, so you may pick, 10 different cards, right? I mean, it's really, you can adjust it however you want. Again, you pick the algorithm, and I always say the name wrong. I say Autolicos, but I know that there's probably a better pronunciation, but I think it's just my quasi Floridian New York accent.
There's a couple of ways.
Yeah,
Autolycos, I say
yeah,
Autolycus.
yeah, that's
There's
what I think of.
numerous different ways.
Exactly. So that's the algorithm you want to select. And here, in my opinion, is the most important setting of all. The
Yes.
cost of power. This is your power cost per kilowatt hour. Most of the world is not at 10 cents right now. So if you come on this site and you just click your GPU and you pick what algorithm you want, and you click calculate, you're going to be in for a rude awakening, because there are parts of the country that are, 2, 3, even 4x at this point, right?
Yeah.
So I think that, adjusting your cost, right, is important. We'll use 10 cents just because I think that's what everyone does, just from a calculation standpoint, although I think it's wrong. But there's some states in the US that do have cheap power, and there are some subsidiaries that you can utilize, such as solar, or all sorts of clean energy.
Yeah.
So um
And then just
outside of
backing
that,
up a little,
yeah,
just when you actually select your mining algorithm as well, it'll populate, or when you choose your card, it'll populate a hash rate and what for basically an average of what they sort of predicted it'll be. It's wise to go into your rig, and once you've actually figured out all those overclocks, is transfer those numbers into the, what to mine itself as well, so that refines the numbers a little bit better as well.
exactly right. And so, for example, this is showing a default setting for a 3060 LHR. I'm actually running one card at, I think, 126 mega hash with much less watts. I think I'm, 110, 112, something around there.
Yeah.
So much more efficient than what this is reflecting here. So it's important to adjust that, because that will directly impact your rewards as you're looking at this.
Yeah.
And then, the other thing, and again, look at it how you want, right? I think miners will, do their own thing. I don't like looking at profitability in 24 hours or current profit or any of this.
Yeah.
I like to get a longer snapshot. Unfortunately, they don't give you that long, but go 7 days,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you can extend out your averages, but look at it from a whole. I think there's a lot of fluctuations, right? And a lot of volatility, especially in the crypto market and in the bear market. Um, but take a look at that, right? Because, for example, we just had a really nice, pump, right, on Ergo. I think we were sitting around low twos, and it's up over three around there. It even went higher than that at one point.
Yeah.
So, but it came back down a little bit, right? So I think getting an average baseline of what the price has been is really good and really helpful as you kind of calculate your profitability over time.
Yeah. Most
Um,
definitely.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's all about the ROI, right? And I think, you could be mining in a bull market and your ROI could be 6 months, but
Yeah.
you could be mining in a bear market and your ROI can end up becoming 14, 16, 18 months, right? So I
Yeah.
think that, taking that into consideration is important because it may take you a little bit longer than you initially anticipated.
And what hurts even more is purchasing cards in a bull run, going into a bear market. The
Yep,
ROI then it gets extended once again.
exactly. And we
Pull
had
it
a
out of my
quite a
heart.
yeah, I mean, we had quite a significant bull run for quite some time. So I think,
Yeah.
it just compounded for a while and prices just got outrageous. Supply and demand, right? I think it's
Yeah.
just the old adage.
Yeah.
So, uh,
Economics.
yep. So, once that's said, and we can play around with this, but we'll put in, our 125, put in our let's just say 112. We're gonna do 10 cents. We'll calculate it. Scroll back down. So the profitability for that card after power would be 87 cents. And again, that's after power. You would be mining roughly $1.14, and this is showing in, my currency in US dollars, but
Yep.
that's what you would obtain, which would, be within a 24-hour time period. So, obviously as you add cards to that, the profitability increases. And it's really just a measure, right? What are you willing to spend? Um, what is that ROI? How long are you willing to wait for that payback? I think now is a good time to look at it, right? It's like you said, buying in a bull market, it's kind of the worst thing that you could do. Well, yeah, it's the same thing with buying mining equipment.
Yep.
I think now cards are at a point where, go shopping. I think that as I mentioned, I've seen a lot of mid-range cards that are almost the same price as kind of the lower range cards,
Yeah.
when you're looking at brand new cards. So something to consider, obviously take into consideration the memory impact and the DAG factor,
Yeah.
right? Because there is there is a life expectancy. It is a long time. But if you're buying, on the secondary markets, 4 gig cards or 3 gig cards, um, they may not last you as long as you may want. So
Yeah.
from again, it's a buyer's market. Go out there, shop around, see what makes the most sense, and really, measure it from kind of almost a business standpoint, right? Get your spreadsheets out. What is my investment? What is my return? How long is it going to take back? Am I going to cash out at certain points to pay back my power? Am I going to eat the power cost? I mean, there's so many different ways to look at it, and it's just really kind of putting that almost that business sense behind it, right? Because in a
Yeah.
sense, you're, investing in equipment, it's becoming an asset, and now you're looking for a return on that investment. So,
Yeah, that's what I was just
look,
about to say as well. Is just like any investment, have a plan because you've got an entry price. You've got to actually make a return on that investment, ultimately paying it off and then turning it into a profit. So, obviously, a lot of people sort of do this as a hobby, but look at the numbers. So it's going to hopefully increase and be profitable for you. So just keep all that sort of that in mind as well. Goes alongside investing and trading, for instance. The same applies to the mining industry as well.
yeah, and I think another, another thing I wanted to add, and I guess this is maybe more of a plug for GetBlock.io, but power costs are high in some places, and as you're looking at this, you may want to get into mining, but based on your geographic location, it may not make sense, right, from a power standpoint. As you get into the 30s and the 40s, right, US dollars per kilowatt hour, it becomes really hard to become profitable,
Yeah,
right? So, I mean, we can even kind of show that here since I think we're still sharing. That really eats at your profits. So now you're making, 34 cents, a third of what you would have been making, right? So I mean, it's kind of simple math. Um, but it becomes hard to mine, right? So, there are services like GetBlock.io offers where there's managed hosting and you pay a price, it's a monthly price that's all inclusive with the hosting, the management, and even the power cost as well, right?
yeah,
So As miners are, looking to get into mining, there are other options, right? So if you feel like you're at a point where you're stuck, but you're really interested, you really want to get into it, look into hosting services. I think that may be something that you may want to explore.
Yeah, for sure. I've just got a comment here from Adam as well. I'll just bring it up actually. Could you explain why only 1/3 of ERG has been mined, and do you see a problem with the top 100 wallets holding over 50% of ERG? So just probably start off by saying that it's about 65% that's been mined now. It's depending on where you actually get the figures. From the Explorer, we're up around, I think it's about 58 million, I think, ERG out in circulation currently from the last time I checked. And if you're looking on CMC, the numbers that they've actually got displayed is incorrect. So we've reached out to those guys numerous times to be able to fix that up, and they haven't acted upon that, unfortunately, at this stage. So that's a fight we're still willing and sort of still pursuing with. And then also a problem with the top 100 wallets holding over 50% of Ergo. Me personally, I don't have an issue with that because anyone who owns any ERG would have had to have mined it, or they would have had to have purchased it. So it's a fair distribution. No one was allocated anything. The treasury is one wallet which was basically provided a treasury funding, and I look at that as sort of a gift from miners as well to be able to fund the development of the protocol. Ultimately, they passed on some of their block rewards for the first, for within the first 2 years to the Ergo treasury. So, me personally, I don't have an issue with it whatsoever.
No, I would agree. I don't have I personally don't have an issue with it as well. I think one important factor to call out, just being a mining pool operator is some of those wallets could, in fact be a mining pool, right? I think that, there's obviously we've talked about centralization and all that, but the mining pool operators themselves, they're basically in custody of that ERG that's mined before it's distributed to miners. And when you look at a pool such as Nano Pool, Hero Pool, some of the really large pools, and even ourselves, when you look to do kind of the front loading to reduce confirmation times for miners. So we're at 20, which is the lowest, but there's a lot of pools out there that are 30, between 36 and 72 typically. We have to front load those wallets. So we're actually we're purchasing ERG, we're investing into those pool wallets so it has enough funds to consistently distribute to miners.
Yeah,
So I think, mining pools are in this business for a reason. A lot of the ones that are on Ergo are very well established. They're not going anywhere, right? I mean, they've been, the mining pools of choice for many algorithms for years now. So I think that's a safe bet, but that's also another way to look at it, right? That there are, other, you know, resources within the ecosystem that may have large wallets because they're doing transactions with either miners or, even maybe some of the dApps that are currently out there, right? So,
yeah.
as things and, Ergo decks and, all this different thing, there's definitely other wallets out there that are, utilized within the ecosystem that may not just be an individual holder.
Exactly. There's another question also. Ergo is the only ground up proof of work blockchain with smart contracts as a competitor to ETH. This is tying into Son of a Text comment, I believe. I think that was on a Twitch stream or something along those lines. It's a really interesting point actually, because we see some forks and bits and pieces like that where they've basically forked Ethereum, made some adjustments, and running off with their own chain. There's different use cases, like for instance, Flux is doing the decentralized sort of networking aspect of sort of the Web3 hosting side of things. Ravens basically sort of probably get shot down for this, but Bitcoin, a fork of Bitcoin with tokens. There's a couple of little sort of bits and pieces there on that side. But to have an actual layer one ground up built smart contract platform that's GPU friendly. Yeah, Ergo, hard to make an argument against that.
No, it definitely, definitely checks all the boxes, right? And I think, again, I think especially Ethereum miners, as they're shifting off of Ethereum, they're starting to recognize that, right? We're starting to see a lot of the big influencers gain interest in Ergo, and it's all organic, right? I don't think that, there's no, venture capitalists that are out there, paying these guys, kind of, greasing their pockets, so to speak. But, it's just, it's really great to see, because I think that, as you kind of, start to peel back the onion within Ergo and really get a deep understanding of, what it's about, how it kind of meets the, initial principles of Bitcoin, and, just the fact that there's, smart contracts that can be utilized. I think there's so much value, and it's truly undervalued at this point in time. And I think, as there's not, as many options with proof of work mining, or they all have their, kind of core competence, like you said. I think that, many will start shifting over to Ergo, just because of the, the nature of it, and the, the ability to develop, not only a token, or, just not only kind of natively, you can, also build, things on top of it, like smart contracts, or even L2 solutions, like, we're working on, and some of the other projects are working on as well.
Yeah, most definitely. It's not just another fork. Like you look at the innovation, the research, and everything that's gone into sort of Ergo itself. It's still mind blowing that from a market cap perspective, how we're still so low. But in time, that'll come obviously
It'll happen.
with awareness and things like that. Just education, videos like this, helping people spread the word and bringing people into our ecosystem.
Yeah, no, agreed. And I think, it's interesting, like, obviously, as profitability adjusts, you start kind of seeing the migration slowly.
Yeah.
Obviously, there was a big, boost in price last week. There was some price discovery, let's call it. And I think that it was funny, because at the same time we started seeing an influx in hash rate, an influx of new miners asking how to mine to the pool, how to do things like that. So, it's kind of interesting how both of them, obviously correlate with each other, but, you kind of see it firsthand.
Yeah, and that's a nice segue into another question from Robert Piper. Do you think Ergo will have the liquidity necessary to handle the potentially gigantic ramp up in hash rate from miners coming from ETH? I'm thinking that'll get worse before it gets better. So just
Um,
sort of, or I'll just have an initial sort of word there.
yeah, you go.
Miners are ultimately the liquidity providers of the protocol. So they're being paid for a service of being secure, being security basically for the protocol itself. So they're the liquidity providers. They're the ones who are going to be providing liquidity to exchanges, doing P2P services, interacting with the ecosystem itself. So ultimately, that's kind of in the hands of the miners themselves in regards to sort of market making and things like that, and also exchange listings. I think that just comes in time. It's going to be inevitable by the time we see the growth in, or from my perspective, of the growth in the ecosystem. The larger players in regards to exchanges, they can't keep turning a blind eye.
No, I agree. And then, if you also look at it even from an emissions standpoint,
Yeah,
right? As the hash rate increases, obviously, one would think, oh, well, there's more, miners, on the network,
there's more
a
spell
bigger,
pressure and more.
yeah, all blah, blah, blah. But
Yeah,
there's also a difficulty impact, right? So as that difficulty increases, it may not be as easy to mine blocks, right? So, there's some things within the algorithm itself that will kind of offset that. And then, there's also, kind of the reduction from EIP 27. So which that was a significant reduction. There's, obviously, another reduction every 3 months, right? So that reduces by 3 ERG. So, that extends the longevity of the available ERG to mine. And then once we kind of get to that, the end of that kind of emissions curve, let's call it, Then we get into, what's out there as far as, storage rent and all that stuff, which could be, available to the miners as well, which, will be really interesting to see, how some of these tools that are, built within the ecosystem now, could potentially evolve to kind of utilize some of that framework, right? So,
Yeah.
I think Arminio said it best, but kind of like a storage wars of proof of work mining where people are fighting or bidding over which box to mine because it has who knows what it has, right? It could have valuable NFTs, tokens, assets, all sorts of different things. So yeah, will be interesting to see as mining, at least from my perspective, how the emissions kind of play out over, you know, obviously a long period of time, but they will end at some point. And I think things will get interesting at that point as well, at least for miners.
Yeah, most definitely. Um, that's an interesting topic, isn't it? Storage rent, like you mentioned, because if there's not enough erg in the box and to actually pay for the rent itself, the miners can claim the contents of that box. And
Uh,
like you mentioned, there could be numerous NFTs in there. There could be wrapped Bitcoin for whoever, like whatever we know. Like, you know what I mean? There could be some big
Yeah.
paydays coming.
And it's so random too, right? I mean, it could be a wallet that has one erg, which could get chewed up very quickly, or it could be, a couple hundred erg, which could last for years, right? At the, the rate of storage rent. So I mean, it'll be interesting to see kind of how that all, plays out when that time comes.
Yeah, most definitely. And just one little comment here from Adam. I feel like I'm a dork for being so early. Uh, I'd say consider yourself extremely lucky if you got into Ergo over the past maybe 3 months or so, because the prices that they're at compared to last year and everything like that, and being able to find a blockchain ecosystem where there's so much innovation and development and research and everything else going into it. Yes, you're extremely lucky, my friend, and
Oh
welcome to
yeah.
Ergo.
Yeah. And I mean, you look a year back even, right?
Yeah,
A year back, the price was much higher. The community was much smaller. The developers, I would say they were active, but if you look at it now, fast forward a year, I mean, there's been so much change over the past year. I mean, the development community has grown significantly. There's multiple projects, that are have been built on Ergo. They're operating, they're sustainable. So yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely still early, but I think that that this community moves at a very fast pace, and there's a lot of smart people developing with the ecosystem, and I think that there's a lot more to come.
yeah, most definitely. So that's right for the comments at this stage. Let's sort of move on a little here. We got a bit sidetracked there, didn't we?
Yeah, yeah, and we were kind of almost wrapped up. Let me see what else we wanted to share here. So I guess, we can kind of look at the mining pool, but that's also something to consider as well, right? So you look at, profitability, and I think that's, one of the biggest challenges, especially for a smaller mining pool. And I do consider ourselves a small mining pool. Although you can look at the hash rate and try to argue that we're kind of like right in the middle right now. But you also need to think these pools are fragmented, right? So we offer smart pools or sub pools, that are all, individual smart pools. They all have their own individual miners, mining to those pools. So
Yep,
when you look at it from a, kind of that fragmented standpoint, each pool is roughly around 100, mega hash each. So when you kind of look at it from a profitability standpoint, at least on GetBlock, that's one thing to consider, that, yeah, the hash rate does look higher, but when you do look at it, from an individual standpoint, it's a cluster of smaller pools. And,
yep,
we are looking to break that out just to make it a little bit more visible. Um, but, as people are mining, it's always like, well, what pool is the most profitable?
yep.
And it's really hard to tell. I think everyone has their own experience. People, typically default to the top pool. I think it's just an easy thing to do. But we do ask, even just as a smaller pool and just, being part of the Ergo community, distribute the hash rate, do
Yeah.
send it to smaller pools. When you do consider, profitability, it all balances out. If you look at it from a longer period of time and not a day, or I've been mining 14 hours and I don't see my balance increasing, and there's a lot of that comes into as inquiries. But you need to think, when you're on Hero Miner and they're finding a block every few minutes, um, it's a little bit different. It's that consistent reward. You see something happening, and we get that. I think that that's understandable. But on the flip side, when you're supporting a smaller pool, not only you get to kind of experience some of the innovation that we offer, like additional rewards and stuff like that, but your rewards would potentially be larger versus what you would gain on the larger pool. So obviously less miners, less hash rate, but that block reward stays the same. So there's a larger piece of the pie to distribute amongst, the smaller group of miners.
Yeah, that's just what I was about to elaborate on there as well. If you're joining a pool that finds a lot more blocks, there's obviously a lot more hash rate there, and so you get a smaller piece of the pie. If you're mining at a smaller pool, uh, the payouts are a little bit larger because there's less miner. They're just a little bit more infrequent, but over time, they're basically the same.
Exactly. And then there's mining fees as well. So I mean,
Yeah,
there's those fees that, again, it doesn't really call it out in what to mine, but there's a pool fee, there's a miner fee that you may need to use, right, as you're using some of the mining software that's out there. So,
yeah,
take that into consideration as you're mining as well. It could be, a reduction if you're running on very slim margins for a period of time. So,
most definitely. We've just got another comment here, and you're probably in the best seat to be able to answer this one. It's from Mike Valinsky. In the US, we just passed a major climate bill that was just passed into law today. Do you foresee any climate politics having any negative effect on sparking an assault on proof of work?
yeah, probably, to be honest with you. So I'm in New York State. There was actually some regulations that were kind of implemented here for proof of work mining businesses.
Yep.
Obviously I'm a, consumer miner, I guess I would call it, a hobbyist. We'll leave it at that. But if I was operating an actual mining business here, like I had a facility and running mining equipment, they put so many different, kind of regulations around that, even almost eliminating it for a time period until they can kind of get their hands wrapped around really how to regulate these things. And I think that that's going to be the biggest challenge. And, what we're all starting to see, I think, specifically in the US, is there's some of these governing agencies, whether it's, a foreign ministry or, administration, or, whatever it may be, that are kind of getting carte blanche from a regulatory standpoint to do whatever they want to enforce,
Yep.
which is scary to, an extent, right? Because when you look at that, it's like, well, how far are they really going to go, right? And we've seen, more on the development side of things, but we've seen some recent, obviously issues with some, developers that, were really just developing open source code. So, that's where, when these bills come into play and these laws and regulations, taking a deep dive into some of those, I'm not huge into politics, but I do know that, these bills get passed and they kind of pick, the top two things as far as, this is really what we want to emphasize on to get this bill passed.
Yep.
But as you kind of really dig into the details, there could be some stuff that, kind of, again, gives them carte blanche to regulate and enforce on some of these areas, especially in mining. So, am I concerned? Not at this point, until, there's been, clear definition, clear guidance as far as what those regulations may be. But, there's also always the uncertainty of, what could they do just with having kind of that free card just to, enforce as they please, right? So I guess that's the unknown, right?
Yeah, most definitely. And you look at it from I'm not in the US, so I'm just a spectator here. But you've got the federal sort of arm just basically trying to overreach into the states and things. And like you mentioned yourself in New York, they've got the state regulations, and that varies quite greatly as well. So you've got states like I think it's something like Wyoming or even Idaho, Texas, etc., who are sort of trying to attract all these miners and have that proof of work infrastructure to be able to buy excess energy and profit from that side of things, and numerous other sort of use cases. So on one hand, you've got one side that's basically trying to regulate it into the ground, and the other side that's basically trying to bring as much innovation and investment into their state as possible.
Yeah, no, I agree. And again, without getting too deep into a political viewpoint, but I think that at the end of the day, it's all about, the government really wants their piece of the pie, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that this would be such a big issue, but I think the decentralized nature of cryptocurrency in general scares people. That there's, potentially a lot of bad actors out there and they're, embezzling money, avoiding taxes, and who knows, there could be some of that. But I think that, from a mining standpoint, some of your general traders that are using centralized exchanges, it really depends on your viewpoints, but I think at the end of the day, that's really what it's all about, and they're going to take every angle they can to try to get their piece of the pie, right?
Yeah.
However it may be. And I think there'll be different levels of that. There'll be, obviously, like you said, the state regulated where some states will welcome it and some states just, maybe don't have the resources to explore it currently. So, they just kind of put a kibosh on it or, a hold on it, in general. So I think that, it's going to change. There's going to be some shifting, but it will be interesting to see as this all evolves because there is regulation coming. I mean, let's all face it. We're seeing it day in, day out. So,
Yeah,
and
most definitely. And the cool thing about GPU mining, obviously, you're using consumer grade hardware. So who's going to tell you that your gaming computer in your basement times 500 is uh, is you know what I mean, is detrimental to the environment, and they're going to start dictating how you use your energy and bits and pieces like that. I think what proof of work offers, which varies greatly compared to, say, a proof of stake system, is you've got no barrier to, or you've got a very limited barrier to entry into cryptocurrency. So you can just have one GPU, you can start mining, accumulating coins, and then you can start interacting in the ecosystem itself. You don't have to go through a centralized exchange or have held cryptocurrency previously to be able to purchase, like, say, a proof of stake coin, for instance. You can just basically start from scratch, start from zero, and you can start interacting with these ecosystems. And I think that's what my personal sort of intuition is telling me is that's what they're more scared of. They don't have control over who can actually start getting into this sort of um, cryptocurrency environment, not having to touch anything to do with like KYC, etc.
yeah, no, I think I agree. I think it's daunting, I think, for many people. They hear mining and they hear, equipment and they maybe get a little, nervous or kind of they shy away from it potentially. But I think when you really kind of get your arms around it, it's like you said, it's a gaming computer that's sitting in your basement. It's just hashing away.
Yeah.
Um, I think that, there's very, um, ease of use from a consumer standpoint, but at the same time, there's also the fair distribution aspect of it, right? So, when you look at proof of work mining in general, you can buy a cheap GPU, you can get into it, you can, start mining, and you could basically mine that coin for the life of the coin. Whereas, proof of stake, yeah, you buy a little bit, you stake it, you'll get a return, but it's I don't know. It's kind of like, the more money you have, the more you can stake, the more governance you have, the more decision powers you have. Where proof of work mining, I think, is a little bit different, and it's got you know, some of that the fair distribution mechanisms kind of embedded with it, and you know, I think a lot of people appreciate that, and I think that it'll go a long way, you know, for a lot of people that kind of start to explore cryptocurrencies and, you know, what's the best way to get into it. I think that, you know, mining is definitely something to look into. I think that, you know, it's definitely a lot more fun than just, you know, buying your favorite coin and holding it.
Exactly. And you yourself, you're a gamer. So to get the most out of, say, something like Pac-Man, you need 10, 30, 90s, don't you?
Absolutely. Yeah, you got to load on up. You know, it's funny, you take a look at some of these GPUs and it's like, you know, you can connect, you know, 15 monitors to it at this resolution. And it's like, geez, I think I could probably connect like 300 monitors at like, you know, 1080, you know,
Just to play
for,
Pac-Man.
yeah, just to play Pac-Man. Exactly. So, but you know, yeah, you know, it's really, it's just, it's an everyday item that, you know, you could buy, you could use, and you could, you know, even use it for some other things like gaming or even, you know, art design or things like that, right?
Exactly.
Proof of useful work, right? So,
Yeah, well, that's the way we're heading, is or by the looks of things
yeah,
anyway.
yeah, yeah.
All right, mate. Well, it's been a pleasure chatting once again. Is there anything you'd sort of like to wrap up with?
No, I think we got it pretty well covered. So, you know what I think we should probably look to do moving forward. It's been going pretty well. So maybe every other week we'll look to do kind of like an educational episode and
Yeah, for sure.
you know, start to take a little bit of a deeper dig into mining itself.
Yeah, most definitely. Sounds good. More than happy to do so.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, guys. Thanks everyone for tuning in. It's been a pleasure chatting to you, Rob, once again. And we'll see you about the same time next week.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, everyone.
No worries. Take care. Have a good one,
Take
guys.
care. Bye now.